A quick look at IMDb will make it apparent Season 4's episode, Be Bad, is one of the most negatively received in Buffy's entirety, and even some who defend it still not viewing it as anything beyond dumb fun. What if I were to tell you though, that not only is it a highly underappreciated episode, but quite excellent in tackling its subject matter? Early into the episode, there's a lecture from Maggie concerning the psychological categorization of the id, ego, and superego. Not only is this important for the episode in which those who drink the Black Frost beer are transformed into id-driven Neanderthals, but an encapsulation of one of the major psychological frameworks of Buffy's narrative, with Buffy's duty tempering her impulses having her represent the ego of a slayer, Kendra having served as the unwavering superego, and Faith having been the uncontrollable id. This comparison to Faith will also crop up later in the episode, in which Buffy's self-loathing at how she perceives herself for normally going along with Parker's lies, likely having her compare herself to Faith, and see herself as being brought down to her level, with Willow's line of,
"What have you done with Buffy?"
later on seeming to be pretty good foreshadowing for later events in Season 4. These can also be represented by Buffy's friend group too, with Xander being considered the id, Willow the ego, and Giles the superego, of which is very relevant to the later events of the episode. On to the first scene at the bar. Xander being belittled by a philosophy student is more clever than it appears, with the rise of pseudo-intellectualism within academia in recent times, convincing many of their superiority under the guise of a title that ultimately has nowhere near the worth they believe. As with the whole meme of a sociology degree not amounting to anything. It's in the philosophy student's conversation with Buffy that the topic of moral absolutes comes up, which ties into the episode's focus and the series' overarching exploration on morality. Despite the title of the episode and its placement as part of an anti-alcohol PSA deal made by WB, it doesn't outright demonize non-magical beer, beyond Giles' criticism of Xander, which has more to do with paternal feelings for Buffy. When focusing on this scene and Black Frost's ability to turn its drinkers into creatures of id, that we see very classical takes on morality, that there are moral absolutes of good and bad, but that doesn't make an action or person good or bad automatically by association. This is very relevant when considering the direction this season and onward would take to Spike's character, with the nature of a soulless vampire being unquestionably evil and selfish, and in psychological terms purely driven by the id. But the circumstances and motivations of his selfish desires reaching the point where he does good through his actions despite this. This is apparent with the end of the episode, in which Xander seeing Buffy's realization that beer is a good enough lesson learned rather than demonizing beer. Also, the explanation that the Black Frost did this through Jack copying his warlock brother-in-law is whimsical yet consistent with the scope and ease of access of magic in Sunnydale. Before going over the importance of the id embracing Neanderthals, I'll talk about the scenes involving Willow, as these are easily the best of this episode in terms of her wider character arc. It's in this episode that she becomes aware of the bond forming between Oz and Veruca, which lead into one of the most important events for her character in this season and in general. This leads into her conversation with Parker, with her masterfully manipulating Parker, which not only highlights her intelligence in reading people, as with Hyena Xander in Season 1, but shows her growth from back then when comparing how gullible she was in what's actually one of the series' worst episodes, in I, Robot You, Jane. With what I've said of her representing Buffy's ego, her overcoming a man ruled by id shows the importance of Buffy tempering her mind to move on from a bad experience. No matter what you think of the episode, it's undeniable it contains one of the most important highlights in Willow's character growth. Also, one thing overlooked about Parker's persuasion is his mention of a casual relationship not needing the preface of "I'll never grow any older with you." I'd say this is probably the one thing Willow would take to heart from their conversation, in knowing this was one of the many reasons Buffy and Angel's relationship was doomed. Now, onto the beer-riddled cavemen. The transformation of Buffy into a primitive being controlled by her id isn't just entertaining, but an important line crossed when considering how vampires represent the id, Faith being someone who is ruled by base desires, and how Buffy's arc going forward would place even more of a struggle for her to contain her impulses, as she becomes more like Faith, particularly in Season 6, as I've covered to some extent before. Despite that, her cave slayer self still goes against her instincts of fire bad to save Willow, showcasing how integral her ego as a slayer and a person is to her character, even when it's suppressed by Warlock beer. Despite the displays of the id's flaws, Cave Slayer Buffy saving Willow and the other Neanderthals through her instincts, juxtaposed with Giles getting nowhere in describing her to a random student when looking for her, shows the importance of the id in a person's full being, with there being times in which impulsiveness is more important in overcoming the problem than overanalyzing it, as with Giles, or the students who spout philosophy without changing anything. Or, to put this in Nietzschean terms, the restrictive order of the Apollonian mind can sometimes miss solutions to reality, embraced by the Dionysian mind. In short, sometimes the quickest way to fix a problem is to rush in.
So I will through the fire.
With all that said, Beer Bad isn't just a goofy episode or PSA, but an interesting exploration of the Freudian concepts that are woven into the entire series with a pinch of Nietzsche. How this ties into the nuances of morality and Buffy's strength of character all tied together with magical beer acting as a metaphor, to make this an excellent microcosm of the Buffy series. Thank you if having listened through all my analysis. If wanting to see more analyses I've done on Buffy, see this playlist. Comment any subjects you'd like to see me cover in a future video. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss it, and I'll see you next time. Right, time for a drink.